Well, hey guys, and welcome back to Dan's Pro Shop. Today, we are digging into a little bit of a it quit working and I need it to work situation. So what we got here is a pellet stove, for an anti-cold device for the shop here. And it starts throwing codes and stuff and just making it not do what it's supposed to do. So I tore this thing apart and I'm pretty sure I nailed it down. So if you have one of these things and you're running into problems, this might be just the thing that gets you on the right path. So if you're interested, stick around, see if we can't fix this here pellet stove. So fellas, the problem seems to be a tad sporadic in nature, but you can narrow it down if you use some simple trouble tree logical thinking here. So this particular one is a US stove or an Ashley branded, AP5710. US stove AP5710. This is a super common, typical, like run-of-the-mill, smaller pellet stove. Actually, I think I got this one from Tractor Supply. Oh boy, in like 2015. So at the time of this video, 10 years I've been running this thing, and knock on wood, this is like the first I've had to like look at it thing. Yes, I've done some work on it in the past, besides like regular maintenance, cleaning it and everything. The only thing I've done so far is replace the exhaust like blower motor. And it's even then, like, it wasn't bad, it was just making a lot of noise and it was annoying as all get out, but it still works. But either way, these things are relatively simple to fix, and they're kind of easy to figure out as long as you retained the original manual, because there actually is some good stuff in here. And it's just like logical, basic electric stuff. So the problem that we're having here is it's throwing an E2, an E3, and an E4. But it's like sporadically throwing these codes. It's not the same one every time. It might be like, I start up in a 4, I start up in a 4, or I start up in a 2, I start up in a 4, I start up in a 3. It's, yeah, either way. But if you look through the manual here, they give you a troubleshooting guide based on your condition and or the code that shows up here on the display. So reading through all this stuff, I'm not going to bore you with it, but the consensus is basically once this thing starts up and it actually ignites, there's a timer on the igniter so it knows how long the igniter's on for. There is a timer on how long the auger motor runs for, so how long it's dumping pellets into the burn pot, and it monitors a sensor in the exhaust induction fan. It wants to see heat in that fan port to let it know that, hey, yes, this thing has sparked up and we're creating fire. If it doesn't see that, it thinks that there's a problem and it shuts down. And that sensor just so happened to be this little SOB right here. This little thing, my friends, is more commonly referred to as a POF, or a proof of fire sensor. But if you guys know anything about HVAC and like just furnaces in general, this is nothing more than a high heat limit sensor. This is just a thermally activated switch. So like this is a bimetallic thing with a spring in it, and whenever it sees a set temperature, one direction or the other, it'll either open or close the contacts. This particular one is normally open, and then whenever it sees a set temperature, it closes. But don't worry, we'll go over this. Now let me see if I can't stick your noggin in here so you can better see what's going on. Here on the right side of the stove, there is the exhaust motor. So this is like a big squirrel cage motor basically, or I don't know if you want to call it a squirrel cage. It's a freaking fan. This fan spins and induces a draft for the exhaust on the pellet stove. This hole right here in this wiring goes to this switch. It sits right here, and it wants to see this thing get hot, meaning that there is hot exhaust gas coming through here, telling us that there is a fire burning in the pot. Now these things are traditionally suspect because of just the nature of what they are. They go through a lot of thermal stress turning on and off, even though that's the design of these things and that's what they're supposed to do. But they are like a common fail point. Even in just like regular residential, like natural gas furnaces, there is a high heat limit sensor on the heat exchanger that if something happens and it gets too hot, they kick off. Well, those things go bad. It's sometimes, I don't know, it's a part that goes bad, but these things are usually suspect. They're generally inexpensive to replace and they're super easy to diagnose. So we'll set this thing up at the bench here and get this thing testing. You guys can tell here, I've already kind of done some preliminary stuff, and honestly, I think I may have fixed it by accident. You can tell here, there's kind of a decayed and crumbled fiberglass gasket that goes around this thing, but luckily there's enough of it, I think I can reuse it. But you can tell here it's all scratched up and beat up. I cleaned this thing up with some emery cloth and just went around it. When I pulled this thing out, there was probably about a ½ inch of gunk sitting on the end of this sensor, and I think that may have been the primary cause of my problem. This thing was too insulated from the heat going past it that it wasn't activating the switch properly. But since we have it out to clean anyway, we're going to go ahead and test it for function. We'll go ahead and throw it in the vise and I'll show you what I mean. Go ahead and clamp this thing up for safety. Go ahead and grab us a multimeter. Alrighty, so we got a meter. We'll go ahead and set this thing up to ohms with a tone. So there you go. We have continuity and a 0 on the screen, meaning we have continuity. It's all good. So we'll go ahead and hook up to this thing. Just go ahead and put our alligator clips there on the back. And right now, it's telling us this thing is open. So right out of the gate, that tells us one of two things. Either this is a normally open switch, and that's the way that it's supposed to be. Or it is malfunctioned. It's supposed to be closed, and it's open. But since this is a thermal switch, it's easy enough to activate. Let's go ahead and put this thing under some fire and see if this thing changes state. There we have it. Let her come back down to a temperature below its set point. Any minute. There we go. This thing actually switches. So that tells us a lot right there with this down and dirty, simple 30-second test. This switch is supposed to be normally open or, off in its normal resting position. It has to be activated by heat to close or to allow electricity to flow through it. And we did that easily in a couple seconds with just a regular old Bic lighter. So now I know for sure the state of this thing, what it's supposed to be, and that it's actually functioning. So from the bench testing here, this switch operates. It does what it's supposed to. My best guess is because that code that I was having was so sporadic and all over the place, and there wasn't a certain set amount of time that it was running, or it was just kind of all over the place. Sometimes it would start up and immediately kick off. Sometimes it would start up and run for an hour and then kick off, and be it one of those three codes. If I had to guess, it was the amount of carbon buildup on the end of this switch causing the problem. But either way, I think I'm going to go ahead and jump on the Amazons and get one of these switches and just have it sitting on the shelf just in case. Who knows, maybe from me taking this thing out, beating it up, banging it around, testing it, cycling it a couple times, maybe just kick-started this thing and got out of the funk that it may have been in. But either way, we'll go ahead and throw this thing back in and see if this fixed our problem. All right, I'm going to try my best to do this without blocking your view of it. And I know, I'm sure there's probably a lot of you out there cringing because I'm reusing this torn gasket, but yeah, I think it's going to work just fine. So we'll go ahead and put this thing back in there where it's supposed to go. Put that gasket back in there as best we can, and we'll just go ahead and torque this old SOB down. Couple Fluke head screws. Come on. Where are you at? Come on. There we go. Go ahead and smush that thing down sufficiently. Go ahead, reconnect our wiring. I think we're ready for a function test. Now we got everything put back together. Go ahead and close this up. And just so you guys know, in case you don't, it's perfectly fine to run this thing with the sides off. I mean, obviously you want them on there to protect stuff and so it looks nice, and obviously if you have this thing in your house to keep stuff out of there and everything. And yes, they are kind of a heat shield, but what I'm getting at, it's not detrimental to run this with the side panels missing, especially when you're doing something like this for diagnostics and testing. But we'll go ahead and plug this thing back in because I was messing with wiring. It's just a best practice to unplug it when you're doing stuff like that. And now we're going to go through the labor-intensive process of doing a function test on this thing and turn it on. Now we just wait and see what happens. Well, don't mind if I make myself comfy for this process. Well, I don't know about you guys. I mean, we could hang out here for the next 6 hours and make sure it does what it does, but this is already way more success than I had just earlier today doing the same testing. I hadn't gotten this far. Usually it pretty much just made it through startup, got a flame, and within the first 2, 3, 5 minutes, it was giving me an error and freaking out. So I'm 99% confident that's what did it. Let's go over to the bench and review what happened. So guys, this darn book that came with it is probably the most valuable thing here in this whole repair because of the troubleshooting diagram. And not only that, it gives you a full parts list of manufacturer part numbers and descriptions, wiring diagrams that's totally labeled, and an exploded view of the entire stove and all the parts. I will do my best to try to find a PDF of this manual, and I'll link it down in the description, as well as that particular switch, because I did some digging on Amazon while this thing was sparking up, and I found that exact same one with that manufacturer part number on Amazon for $14.74 with a 10% off coupon. And you know, with Prime, it'll be here the day after tomorrow at the latest. So, I mean, I call this a blaring success. Now, if you're experiencing this same issue, is this going to be your problem? Who knows? These error codes on these things are so insanely vague. Like, it's like, hey, if you have an E2, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. Well, I don't know. If I forgot my left shoe at work and my mother's maiden name starts with a Q and it rained on Tuesday, then maybe the door was left open. You have to know how to interpret this crap. And you know, that just comes from doing stuff like this, doing diagnostics and trouble trees and everything. And since I was bouncing back and forth between those 3 different codes, I read through the trouble tree on those 3 codes and found the common denominator, if that makes any sense. So the one most likely cause in those 3 codes that overlapped that might be the most likely culprit, that sensor on the exhaust, that proof of flame, the POF, to make sure that that thing actually sparked up after start. And lo and behold, I mean, she's still behind you cooking over there, so I really think that that did it. But like I mentioned, I'm going to get a new switch anyway, just so if that thing does crap out for good, I have one sitting here. I don't have to go through this again and actually wait for one. But yeah, I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's really not much to these things as far as like wiring and mechanics. I mean, it's a couple fans, it's a couple switches. There's not much to them. I mean, it's a glorified wood burner. There's just a motor that feeds it wood. But hopefully, if you guys ran into or currently running into a situation like this, hopefully this helps you out. It at least gives you like an avenue to go down for some preliminary diagnostics. Like I mentioned, this might not be your exact problem, but if it is, Bob's your uncle, man. Now you got it. Be sure to check out those links down in the description, and I hope this helps somebody out. I'm going to go enjoy my functioning pellet stove. We will see you next time.